I've been a long-haul trucker for over a decade. I've seen it all on the road. Strange lights, weird weather, even the occasional hitchhiker who seemed to disappear into thin air. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered one fateful night in the remote stretches of New Mexico. I had just picked up a load of electronics from a warehouse in Albuquerque and was headed to Los Angeles. My plan was to drive through the night to make up for lost time. The route took me along US Highway 60, a desolate stretch of road that cut through the desert, where cell phone signals were sparse and the nearest gas station was often hours away. At around 2:45 a.m., I was cruising at a steady 65 miles per hour, the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from my CB radio the only sounds in the cab. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow, and the road ahead was a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the pitch-black desert. My co-driver, Matt Stevens, was asleep in the back of the cab, having finished his shift a few hours earlier. My eyes were starting to get heavy, and I was thinking about pulling over for a quick nap when I saw something up ahead in the distance. At first, it was just a faint glow, but as I got closer, I realized it was the taillights of another vehicle. I hadn't seen another car for hours, so the sight was unusual, if not welcome. As I approached, I saw that it was an old beat-up van swerving erratically across both lanes. I slowed down, wary of passing such an unpredictable driver. Just as I was about to pick up my CB radio to warn other drivers, the van suddenly veered off the road and into the desert. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled my truck over to the shoulder, killed the engine, and grabbed my flashlight. I quickly woke Matt, explaining what I saw. Both of us stepped out of the truck, the cold desert air hitting us like a slap in the face. Jesus, what kind of idiot drives like that out here? Matt grumbled, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I don't know, but we should check if they're all right, I replied, already heading towards the spot where the van had gone off the road. We found the van about 50 yards off the highway, its front end buried in a sand dune. The headlights were still on, illuminating the desolate landscape in an eerie glow. I approached cautiously, shining my flashlight into the van's interior. What I saw made my blood run cold. The driver's seat was empty, but the van was full of blood. It was splattered across the dashboard, the seats and the windows. I felt a wave of nausea, but forced myself to look around for any signs of life. "Hey, is anyone out here?" I called, my voice echoing in the stillness. There was no response, just the soft whisper of the wind and the distant howl of a coyote. Matt joined me, his face pale as he took in the scene. "Jesus, what the hell happened here?" Matt whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "I don't know, but we need to call the cops," I replied, reaching for my phone. As expected, there was no signal. Damn it, we'll have to use the radio. We hurried back to the truck, but as we climbed into the cab, I noticed something strange. A man was standing in the middle of the road, staring directly at us. He was tall, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. He wore a dirty, tattered jacket and jeans, and his hands were covered in what looked like dried blood. My first instinct was to lock the doors, but the man was already moving towards us, a slow, deliberate pace that sent shivers down my spine. "Who the hell is that?" Matt asked, panic rising in his voice. "I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out," I replied, starting the engine. Just as I was about to put the truck in gear, the man reached the driver's side door and slammed his bloody hands against the window. His face twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing yellow, broken teeth. "Help me," the man croaked, his voice raspy and weak. I hesitated for a moment, torn between the urge to help and the overwhelming fear coursing through me. Before I could make a decision, the man suddenly lunged at the door handle, trying to force it open. I floored the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward and leaving the man behind in a cloud of dust. "Jesus! What the hell was that?" Matt shouted, gripping the dashboard. "I don't know, but we're getting out of here," I replied, my heart pounding. We drove for another 30 minutes, neither of us speaking, the tension in the cab palpable. Finally, we reached a small diner and truck stop, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. I pulled in, and we both jumped out, heading straight for the payphone outside. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I explained what we had seen. The dispatcher assured me that a patrol car would be sent out to investigate and told us to wait at the diner for the officers to arrive. As we waited, we tried to calm our nerves with a cup of coffee. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of other truckers and the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Sally, who looked like she'd seen her fair share of late-night drama. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she remarked, pouring us another round of coffee. "We might have," I replied, managing a weak smile. About an hour later, 2 state troopers walked into the diner. Matt and I recounted our story, and the officers exchanged a look that made my stomach churn. "You say you saw blood in the van?" one of the troopers, Officer Ramirez, asked. "Yeah, a lot of it," I confirmed. "And this man, what did he look like?" I described the gaunt, hollow-eyed figure as best as I could. Officer Ramirez nodded, taking notes. "All right, we'll head out there and take a look. You boys stay put for now," the officer instructed. Matt and I watched as the troopers left, their cruiser disappearing into the night. We sat in silence, the events replaying in our minds over and over. About 2 hours later, the troopers returned, their expressions grim. Officer Ramirez approached us, shaking his head. "We found the van, just like you said, blood everywhere, but no sign of a driver or any bodies. We did find tracks, though. Looks like someone walked away from the crash site." "Did you find the man we saw?" Matt asked, his voice trembling. "No, but we'll keep looking. In the meantime, you boys should get some rest and stay off that highway until we know more." We nodded, too exhausted and shaken to argue. We rented a room at the nearby motel and tried to get some sleep, but the image of the bloodied man haunted our thoughts. The next morning, we decided to head back to Albuquerque to report what had happened to our dispatcher. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow, every movement in the corner of my eye made me jump. Days turned into weeks, and despite the police investigation, no trace of the man or any victims was ever found. The incident became a ghost story among truckers, a cautionary tale about the dangers of the road. I never forgot that night. I continued driving, but I never took the US 60 at night again. And every time I passed through New Mexico, I couldn't help but glance into the desert, half expecting to see those hollow eyes staring back at me. Some nights, when the road was long and the hours were late, I would hear a faint, raspy voice echoing in my mind, whispering, "Help me," and I would grip the wheel tighter, my knuckles white, and press down on the gas, trying to outrun the memory of that terrifying encounter on the long, dark highway. The days turned into months, and I tried to put the memory behind me, but the image of the bloodied man remained etched in my mind. Matt and I continued our long hauls, often talking about that night in hushed tones, wondering what had happened to the driver and where he had gone. One evening, nearly a year after the incident, I received a call from Matt. His voice was trembling, filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Turn on the news," Matt said, his words rushing out. "They found something, near where we saw that van." My heart raced as I turned on the television, the local news station showing footage of a remote desert area. The reporter was standing in front of a group of police officers and forensic investigators. "Authorities have discovered human remains in the desert just off US Highway 60, the reporter said. "The remains appear to be those of a middle-aged man who has been missing for nearly a year. Police have not yet identified the victim, but they are treating the case as a homicide." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew deep down that the remains belonged to the man we had seen that night. The blood in the van, the desperate look in his eyes. It all made sense now. The police continued their investigation, eventually identifying the victim as Robert Miller, a man who had been reported missing by his family months before our encounter. According to the authorities, Robert had been involved in some shady dealings and had likely run afoul of dangerous people. The discovery of Robert's body brought some closure to Matt and me, but it also raised more questions. Who had killed Robert, and why? And what had he been doing out in the desert that night? As the years went by, the story of Robert Miller became a distant memory for most, but not for me. I still drove the long hauls, but every time I passed through New Mexico, I felt a deep sense of unease. I couldn't forget the look in Robert's eyes, the blood on his hands, and the eerie, raspy voice that had pleaded for help. I often wondered if I could have done more that night, if I could have saved Robert. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked on the lonely highways. One particularly stormy night, while driving through the desert, my truck broke down. I was miles away from the nearest town, and my cell phone had no signal. As I stepped out of the cab to check the engine, I heard a faint voice carried by the wind. "Help me." My blood ran cold as I turned around, half expecting to see Robert standing there. But there was nothing, just the howling wind and the pitch-black night. I quickly got back into the cab, locking the doors and trying to calm my racing heart. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear was real, tangible. After several hours of waiting, a tow truck finally arrived, and I was able to get back on the road. But the experience left me shaken, a stark reminder of the night that had changed my life forever. I eventually retired from trucking, settling down in a small town far away from the desolate highways. But I could never fully escape the memories of that night. The story of Robert Miller became a cautionary tale I would tell my grandchildren, a lesson about the dangers that lurk in the shadows. And every so often, late at night, I would wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that faint, raspy voice echoing in my mind. "Help me." It was a reminder that some mysteries are never fully solved, and some memories never fade. The long, dark highways hold their secrets close, and the ghosts of the past linger, haunting those who dare to remember.